So, Dr. Kelly Starrett is the founder of the Ready State, and he's a leader in the field of mobility and human performance, which, from a background in physical therapy, he has revolutionized the concept of mobility and made it a core practice in fitness and health. Now, Kelly's methods are widely used in gyms, clinics, and of course, multiple homes. These helps countless people doing the work that he's doing. So, this is from elite athletes to office workers to the likes of us, right? So, in his ambitions, he's looking to help people with improving movement, reducing pain, building strength, and obviously building that resilience, which of course is very important as people age, which is kind of our beat, right? So today we're very excited to discuss Dr. Starrett's approach to lifelong health and his practical tips for staying alive and active at any age. So Kelly, welcome. How are you doing?
I'm well, thank you. That was such a wonderful introduction, and you really succinctly brought back the point. How can we use our bodies the way we want? How do we do it for as long as we can? And how do we minimize pain and dysfunction and limitation of this incredible gift that this robust body?
Yeah. I guess it's that kind of mobility is really a cornerstone of your thesis, right? So, and you work with elite athletes as well as people like me, So, how do you see obviously movement and the ability of the body to kind of stay active as a priority for quality of life? I know it's a pretty obvious question, but I mean, you're an expert.
No, I think it's really great. Let's define mobility. Because we started using that word when we popularized that word because we wanted a different word from flexibility and stretching,
right,
which were sort of non-specific and didn't have clear goals. So when we say mobility from a technical aspect, I'm saying, do you have native range of motion, which doesn't have to change over your lifespan? So believe it or not, you don't have to become stiff. You don't have to lose the ability to put your arms over your head. You don't have to lose the ability to get up and down off the ground. But because we haven't really prioritized that in exercise and in lifestyle, sometimes our movement language that we express every day is a very few words. So if I was going to look at all of the things that you could possibly do with your body, in all the shapes and all the twisting and all the movements, all the play that you would see at a kindergarten kind of playground, and I applied that language to your modern adult self, you would use like 3 or 4 words. I sit up from a chair, I walk around a little bit, I sit in the chair, I lay down, and that's it. And so what we're really trying to say is, how in the context of a busy life can we maintain as much range of motion? But that's not just it. It's how do we give your brain as much movement choice and as many movement options as we can? So you can think about your mobility as, can I do what I want to do with my body, and can I be pain-free? And early on, we have this huge hallway where we have a lot of movement choice. We can jump in and do adventures and pick up new skills, and we're not afraid to ride a bike or jump off a wall. And then all of a sudden, as we start to get a little stiffer, a little older, we get the patina of I have a real job and I don't sit on the floor anymore and I'm not playing. That movement hallway starts to get a little bit narrow, and we start to lose sort of choice and option. So the question here is, when and where are we going to put this range of motion and access to this back in your life, and who owns that? Is that the responsibility of the medical establishment? We don't think so. We think that we can empower everyone to take a crack at making themselves feel better and keeping an eye on these important native ranges.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess I'm a prime example of somebody that spends a lot of the time sat down. I'm on a bouncy ball, which I kind of consider helps me a little bit, right? But
absolutely.
I stretch in the mornings and the evenings, but in the middle of the day, I'm just like heads down, barreling through.
That's right.
So
That's
what's
right.
the sort of practical exercises that I should be doing to kind of bring these into my daily routine to help my overall health?
So we can almost define or split sort of some of our essentials into 2 categories. One, there's some lifestyle behavior pieces. And I want to be clear, when we work in high performance and we see all the dirty laundry from elite soccer, elite rugby, NFL, the military groups, we see it all. When we're working with them, we're trying to take those best practices and transmute them to my family. I'm just a middle-aged mountain biker in my neighborhood. Like, I just want to be the most badass middle-aged mountain biker in my neighborhood, right? At over 50.
You're probably nailing it as well.
That's it. So what we're trying to do is say, how do we take those lessons? And here's what we know is that if we don't set objective marks for those athletes, then it's just this, we kind of are like, yeah, it's good enough. And it's not really good enough. So by creating vital signs, I think we can begin to sort of empower people to understand minimums and how those minimums change over the week, over the month, over the kind of our lifespan. So there's some things that we do. If I said to you blood pressure 120/80, you'd be like, that's fine blood pressure. It's not great blood pressure, but we know that it's fine. And so that's a good example of Everyone's really comfortable with that, and now let's apply that to some other health behaviors. So let me introduce you to the 8s. Number 1, I want you to lay in bed for 8 hours tonight without looking at your phone. You don't have to sleep for 8 hours. You might need some training to get back to that. But at least if you laid in bed for 8 hours without looking at your phone, I know you're resting. Again, I'm not worried about the quality of your sleep, but we're going to start by saying that's our minimum. And the reason is if you're trying to change your body composition, grow a body, learn a new skill, heal from an injury, that 8 hours is the minimum. What we see is 7 is our threshold for like survival. 8 plus is really our goal. And so already we're going to have a lot of pushback. People are like, I can't sleep that way. I got to grind. I got to hustle. And we're like, well, that's cute, but that's not what the science bears out. And it's not what our best practice bears out. So there's the first 8. I want you to lay in bed for 8 hours. And again, notice what I said. Just don't look at your phone for 8 hours. Just lay in bed. Number 2, I want you to get at least 0.8 grams of protein per pound body weight. And you're going to have to do the maths on that. But the idea is, well, you probably need to put a big chunk of protein through every meal. And what we find is that protein, it's not about muscles, but that's useful. It's about the rest of your connective tissue health, the rest of the system. And you're just going to struggle to realize, wow, I have to eat a lot of protein. The next 8 is 800 grams of fruits and vegetables. That's not 800 grams of carbohydrate. That's 800 grams. So a banana weighs about 80 to 100 grams. And what we're seeing is that we're having a conversation about vitality, but you don't get enough micronutrients or fiber in your diet. So I really can't tell about your gut health and inflammation. And do you have enough of the raw materials on board to make connective tissue? So what we see is that when we start to implement this, we get some calorie control in the bargain. And if you don't like vegetables, that's fine. You're a grown person. You don't have to eat kale, but I need you to eat these berries. I need you to eat these oranges. Yep. And even if someone just ate 4 big apples today and they did that every day because they're meeting the spirit, I would argue that you're going to see a much healthier ecosystem where people are more regular in their bowel movements. They're going to just feel fuller. A pound of cherries, so less than a kilo, 800 grams of cherries is about 230 calories.
Is there an 8 for carbs though? I mean, is carbs out of your equation on this?
No, not at all. And notice that there's a ton of carbohydrate in these fruits and vegetables. Mm-hmm. And then what we really try to do is say, hey, let's fuel appropriately. So if you need rice and potatoes, and look, sourdough bread is amazing. I think bread is proof of God's intelligence and in human sanctity. Like, we are the dominant species if we've made bread. Don't get me wrong, but what I want you to notice is that I didn't take anything off the table. Beans, white potatoes, they all counted. Doesn't matter if you're vegan, vegetarian, omnivore, what culture you come from. Show me you're hitting enough protein minimums and show me you're getting enough fruits and vegetables. And I will show you a human being who's working really hard to eat this much food. And then what you'll see is that there's just not a lot of room on the sort of corners to eat all of the crap. And so what we try to do is we just say, hey, instead of restricting foods, let's make sure that you're hitting these minimums. So we've got sleep, protein, fruits and vegetables, 800 grams. And then I want you to walk 8,000 steps a day. And if I could give everyone in your family a pill that would reduce all-cause mortality and morbidity by 51%, that would be a pill we would give everyone. And that's 8,000 steps. So it turns out we need to view our human selves as moving animals. We need to be in constant motion. So we found that 8,000 steps is actually a really reasonable clinical number. If with a little bit of intention, I'm going to walk a little bit more, maybe I take a walking meeting, maybe I go for a little 10-minute walk after a meal, I can work that in as a busy working human with real demands. If I say 10,000, I'm out. But 8,000 ended up being really practicable. And what we find is that we're going to accumulate enough non-exercise activity. You're going to fall asleep. We're going to decongest and flush the body. We're going to move that lymphatic system along. And we're also going to load. And why to get 8,000 steps, you're probably outside, getting some sunlight, seeing some friends. So those are the 8s. Then we can start to have a conversation about your range of motion. And the first thing I want you to do is appreciate that exposure rules. So here's your piece of homework tonight to change your life. Let me be clear about this. Change your life.
Hit me.
I need you to sit on the ground watching telly for 20 or 30 minutes. That's it. I just need you to, in the evening, plop down in front of the couch. You can lean up and you can sit crisscross applesauce, side saddle, 90-90, long sit, one leg up, kneel. but I don't really care. But what you'll start to see is that accumulating that much time in these end range positions is going to dramatically remind your brain and your tissues, because muscles and tissues are like obedient dogs. You will be able to have access to some of these positions. And what you're going to be surprised at is that getting up and down off the ground is uncomfortable, but that if I get you getting up and down off the ground and sitting on the ground, what you'll see is that in the course of a week or 2 weeks, your life is going to be profoundly changed.
Okay, that sounds like very good advice. I mean, I guess that, I'm representative of many people. I do get my 8 hours, but I even when I listen to people like yourself, Kelly, it's kind of like, yeah, okay, I'm not doing that. I really should be doing that. And I guess that, this is all very basic things that we really should be and could be doing, right?
Well, and I can't understand what we often are trying to do is add a complex system, a complex solution to a complex system.
Yeah.
And that complexity confuses us, and it's really difficult for us to have objective measures and inputs and outputs. And what I want everyone to understand is if you don't hit those, you're going to get another shot tomorrow.
Yeah.
And then you'll get another shot the day after. And there'll be a time where your family's in, or you're traveling, or you're stressed. And what nice is now we can start to say, oh, hey, I'm wondering, am I hitting these benchmarks and these guidelines? And that really gives us an opportunity to have the next conversation.
Mm-hmm.
But what's happening is if we're trying to parse through a lot of data, the data I'm getting on people is really dirty, because what's happening is where we see a really stressed, undernourished human being that's not moving. And notice that in all of that, there's not a whiff of exercise that we've talked about yet.
So let's talk about the work that you do with elite athletes, right? So you've got the eights in place, right? So how do you actually balance that in terms of what you're doing with professionals? I mean, that's very interesting to understand how you calibrate the work that they're doing and how that works.
So one of the things that we're trying to do is ultimately we do something we call reduce session cost. How might we, there in professional sports, maybe in the 80s and 90s, you could outwork the competition. I think I'm of an age where I was like, we'll just outwork those guys, and that ship has sailed. It's impossible to outwork the competition. People have become very sophisticated. But what we can do is, one, have better culture. We can feel belonging. We can feel safe. We can have better communication. We spend a lot of time working on that with our elite athletes, which is very strange, but that is a competitive advantage. And then the second thing we do is we say, how can we pay less of a session cost physiologically? So you and I do the same amount of work, but I have to pay 50% of what you pay. Over time, I will get more work done, and I'll be fresher and handle higher volumes and feel better in my body, and you will not be able to keep up with me. And so one of the ways we do that is asking, do you have access to normative range? So that's the lowest sort of common denominator. My shoulders, I should have 180 degrees of shoulder flexion, which means my arm isn't bent, my elbow isn't, my head isn't tipped over. I'm not trying to work around the problem. I'm going to work around the problem no matter what. But what we're really trying to do is say, hey, sports life tends to bias us and move us away from having this normative range. And I mean normative range that every physical therapist, every physician, every group agrees within about 5 degrees of what is typical of every human, any age, any race, any gender, right? This is what humans should be able to do. Yeah. So we have these normative values. And what we try to do is say, number one, who owns position? And so we try to put position on the plate of responsibility of the athlete to understand her minimums and how those minimums change with the sport she's doing, performing. So suddenly now what we can do is this athlete says, hey, I'm missing some interrotation on my shoulder. So the real question and the things we work on with other athletes and those teams is, how does this athlete understand and quickly assess that? How does she understand how it limits her performance in the pool, on the pitch, doing something? How does that physio understand? Is that a pain problem? How is that related? If it's not a pain problem, how is it being addressed in the performance room? So it's not just get a bigger engine, be stronger, have better condition. It's also, how do we restore your motion and improve your economy? And so suddenly now we have a through line input of the athlete owning her shapes, because she's responsible. Yeah. We have coaches who are understanding why she or may not be able to attain a drill or access a position. The athlete can mobilize to restore those positions, and the gym is reinforcing those shapes. And so what we do is we're almost stripped out the physiology out of that, or the conditioning, energy system, strength. And really what we're saying is, hey, this is position and coordination training with resistance and conditioning.
Okay.
Again, position and coordination training with resistance and conditioning. So what we're doing is we're always working on giving athletes more access, more movement choices and solutions that are more stable under more conditions. And over time, when we add in fueling and sleep, what we have is a human being. And now we can actually see who's the best coach, who's got the best tactics, who's got the best genetics. But until we get to that place, we have a lot of work to do.
So I got just a short question, really, which is how do you measure that, right? So obviously,
great, right. Yes. So when this is so good, so notice that I already have created objective measures that are evidence-based: sleep, nutrition, walking. Those are all evidence-based. Well, it turns out that we have an objective measure. It's called your range of motion. So that's something I can hang my hat on: 1 or 0, yes or no. So in our app, for example, we're nice to people. We're like red, yellow, green. I want you to bring you on this. But when you work with me, I'm ruthless. Your body even does what it's supposed to do or it doesn't, 1 or 0, right? And so number 1, we have 1 or 0 conversations around range of motion. And 2, biomotor output. Can you create high intra-abdominal pressures? Can you rotate further? Can you generate more wattage? Can you create more force? Are you faster in the pool? Are you faster on the pitch? When we give athletes better positions and access to those shapes with healthier tissues, they go faster and harder, and they can do that more often. So we're really about the objective outputs and not just the subjective. I feel better, like I want to give my athletes more movement choice, but when we're testing it, I should experience higher rates of force production, greater force range, et cetera, et cetera.
Got it. That's very good. So let's talk about, as you know, our audience is a very mixed bag of people that are everything from Gen Z through to Boomer, right? So we're covering a lot of people that are focused on their own health and longevity. And of course, chronic pain is one of those things that limits people's ability, right? So, I tend to push through pain. If I got pain, I'll work it rather than not. And it seems to work out most of the time. But
most of the time,
what are the sort of self-maintenance techniques that people can use to kind of manage their own chronic pain and mobility?
And that's really a great question. For a long time, especially in modern sport, what we've said is pain is a medical problem. So it's a physician problem, but there aren't enough physios or physicians, and the coaches aren't allowed to talk about it. So what we see is that athletes go and seek it out for themselves. They'll default to bourbon or ibuprofen or THC. Honestly, this is how most of us cope.
Right.
We call it self-soothing. So if I don't have any strategies, what are the strategies available to me? Welcome to the opiate crisis in America, right? So
got it.
What we end up doing then is saying, first of all, what is an injury? When do I need to activate the medical system? So I have a clear mechanism injury. There's a bone sticking out of your thigh. I think we should go talk to the doctor, right? I have something that looks like pathology: night sweats, dizziness, fever, vomiting, nausea, right? There's something that looks like you're sick. Go get help.
Yeah.
Or can't occupy my role in the family, can't occupy my role in my society. Those are good reasons. Can't do my job on the team. So now we've activated the emergency medical system. If your back hurts so bad you can't go to work, quit messing around. Let's go get some help. Everything else we call an incident, not an injury. And that means that pain we have to be comfortable with is a typical and normal expression and experience of being a human. In fact, we actually lump pain, because it's so highly subjective, in the same category as force production. So if you and I are doing a workout and you suck today, I can say, what's going on? You're like, well, I'm really stressed at home. I didn't get a good night's sleep. And we're like, oh, okay, no problem. I understand that. That's why you're not performing very well today. And you can be like, yeah, I didn't even eat breakfast. I'm just getting through. When we suddenly have pain as a check engine light, we try to teach our athletes that pain is a request for change. And that change can be, did you sleep? Right? What are the stressors on the human being? Tell me about your stress. Tell me about your sleep. Tell me about hydration. Tell me about chronic inflammation. Tell me about how you're coping with alcohol. All of the things that are making it more easily for your brain to perceive what's going on in your body as a threat. Then we can start to say, what are the tools and tactics I have as a human to make myself feel better? We can desensitize that very quickly. So desensitization could be using a percussion gun, doing some soft tissue work, massage, scraping, right? There's a whole lot of things I can do to say, hey, I've told my brain through the tissues that this is safer now. I've de-escalated. I subjectively have less pain, so I can go move. We often find that those athletes or the people we're working with who have pain have congested tissues. They're not moving the waist along. We've got swelling and congestion, which makes the tissues more sensitive to being dramatic or not loading or being painful or uncomfortable. We can get more blood flow in there. Sounds like walking again. Sounds like blood flow restriction. Sounds like there's a whole lot of ways where we can get, how many friends over 50, you're like, once I'm warmed up, I can do anything, right? That's our joke. Oh, once I'm warmed up, I can do anything. Well, warmed up is how do I get blood into this area, these tissues moving? And lastly, range of motion. If your elbow is stuck bent at 90 degrees, and I'm having to use a really long fork to eat breakfast, you're like, what's wrong with you? And I'm like, I don't know, but my elbow's killing me. You'd be like, well, why don't you fix that? And I'm like, Fix what? Your elbow doesn't work. And you're like, it doesn't matter. I have these long forks. Well, that's what we're doing with all other aspects of our bodies. We're not looking at what should I be able to do. And remember, restoring range of motion, having access to range of motion, plus some of these other desensitization, reperfusion, decongestion tools, that is a really powerful skill set that allows me to not freak out when I'm on holiday and my knee starts to hurt, or I overdo it on pickleball court and I'm not freaked out because I'm like, I just overdid it. What am I going to control? I have these environmental behaviors I'm going to control, and I have these simple tools that are very cost effective, are very safe, that I can do in front of my TV. That is how we end up solving and improving people's desire to train. Because I recently just was with 100 kids all in high school. I asked them, how many of you are pain free? And 2 hands go up. 2. Oh. And all the heads turn around. All the adults are like, whoa, what's going on? And I'm like, yeah, these kids are athletes. And they're like, yeah, well, pain is just a part of being an athlete. We've learned that when we were in middle school. Mm-hmm. So, what we want to do is say, let's get to the next conversation. Let's not freak out when something hurts. You haven't slipped a disc. That's not a thing. Your back is sore. What are we going to do to make your back feel better?
Yeah. And of course, there's a lot of mental health benefits that come through all of this as well, right? So,
yes, loci of control, agency. Yes, go on.
Yeah. So I guess I'm interested about what happens outside the gym, right? Because
I haven't said even anything about the gym.
No, that's right. And I guess it's kind of like, well, you mentioned the TV sitting on the floor, that type of thing. I was on the chiropractor's bed today, and I said, well, I'm flying next week. He said, well, you need to have a regime that you can do anywhere, right?
That's
Whether
right.
You're in a hotel room, in your front room, or somebody else's front room, right? So what would you say are kind of the basics that we should all be doing to make sure that we have that basic flexibility and range of motion in our bodies?
Yeah, so let's take a step back and say when and where you're going to do that, right? Because let's pretend that you're a busy working person. You might have a family, and it's not appropriate for you to lay on the ground at work to roll out your glutes. Like, that's just weird. Don't do that, right? So what we see is in the morning before people leave for the work or leave for the day, they probably have 10 minutes of control. There's some agency there. So we invented 3 things, or we do 3 things that we hand out to all our athletes. And if you search my name and these things, you will find them. Number 1 is we do something called the hip spin up, which is just a simple ground flow, end range. Think about what a sun salutation would look like for athletes. And we're touching some spinal shapes. We're touching some hip range. We're touching some quads and hips and hamstrings. And in 8 or 10 minutes, we're going to be spending a lot of time at end range moving through. And what you're going to see is, number 1, you'll have a baseline of, wow, I've got stiff after this bike ride and big run I did this weekend. And simultaneously, if you didn't do anything else the rest of the day, you have touched all those positions, like brushing your teeth and flossing. You've touched those shapes. We have the shoulder spin up and we have a breath spin up. And what we ask is our athletes in 10 minutes, can you do one of these 3 things in the morning for 8 to 10 minutes? And what we find is that is a meaningfully therapeutic enough dose where we see real change. And simultaneously, I know you have 8 minutes in the morning. And if you're not, you need to set your alarm and be a big boy and spend 8 minutes moving your body. And the reason we love this is that when we start to touch these ranges, not only does it make our bodies feel better for the rest of the day, and people who feel better tend to perform better in all aspects of their lives, but also if you have a chance to exercise, which is miraculous, you're going to be better prepared to go just jump in and do it. You're not going to have to spend 15 or 20 minutes getting the diesel on, cranking the thing, you're already touched those shapes. So that's in the morning. In the evening, and again, then walk all your steps during the day, smash all those fruits and vegetables, try to move as much as you can, try to limit the total time you're sitting. Then in the evening, after exercise or not, we want you to sit on the ground for 20 or 30 minutes. And if you're sitting on the ground, isn't the roller just right there? And now I've created a behavior where I don't have to go get the roller, do a thing. I'm already sitting on the ground. And what this does is gives me a chance to ask a couple questions. The first question is, what's sore? What hurts?
Mm-hmm.
What did I use today?
Yeah.
And let me put 10 minutes of input. So if I have two legs, that's 5 minutes on my left thigh, 5 minutes on my right thigh. I'm going to check the box. And what we found is clinically significant adherence to that. That ended up being really a reasonable amount of time for people. And it allowed us to start looking and be curious about blind spots. And that we were suddenly putting the roll on our back, putting the roll on our traps, rolling on the ball on our glutes, talking to our calves. And what that does is it creates this conversation about myofascial mobilization, about stiffness, about soreness. And it also teaches me how to manage and sort of load these tissues meaningfully in a way that when something pops up, I already have a skill set. So we love 10 minutes of soft tissue work. And guess what? Those people who do that fall asleep faster, stay asleep longer.
Yeah.
It's almost like you're training your body. So if you, at the very least, travel with a lacrosse ball, travel with a cricket ball, travel with a baseball, and then ask yourself, what's sore? And then there are plenty of tools. We have on our website, we have a foam rolling protocol that's free. You can go on there. We'll teach you the basics of how to take care of yourself. And all you need to do is begin a conversation. You don't have to be perfect, but 10 minutes a night. And suddenly look at what happens. We didn't even talk about exercise because I have strong feelings about that.
Mm-hmm.
But what we did was we said, look at all this movement, look at all these behaviors, fruits and vegetables, fiber, movement, sunlight, walking, sitting on the ground, end range, soft tissue input. That is a physical practice that will get you to 100 years old. Throw in a little breathing heart and some weight training and some play. You're going to be 120 years old and you're going to be killing it. So that's really what we're trying to do is how do we demystify and simplify what seems like a whole bunch of complex behaviors because no one needs another listicle or another like 10 things you need to do in the morning.
Yeah.
It just doesn't work. And we see it's not working.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I guess that you're referring to, of course, the fact that you start this early in your life and you keep it going throughout your life, then you're going to have that range of motion and that flexibility. And I guess you're never too old to start as well, right? So you get into
I want to just double click on something you just said. Is number one, muscles and tissues are like obedient dogs. They always come around. You can always teach an old dog new tricks. So your tissues will adapt at any age. You might have some tissues that are ultimately limited because you did some really wonky things as a child or you played a professional sport and you have a bony block. Great. Well, let's continue to control what we can control and have the ranges. Not everyone is a special snowflake with all there's like, oh, this is my gimpy knee that I hurt back in playing on the pitch in Vietnam. Like, okay. But like what we want to say is how are you managing these tissues instead of using this as apologetics or excuses? And the second thing is you don't have to lose your range of motion as you age. It's the one thing. It's hard to change your bone density as you get older, hard to put muscle on as you get older. That's true. Unless you're on the 1980s powerlifting cocaine and steroids routine, which is really illegal and expensive and not good for your body, you're probably going to be a little bit slower, but there's no reason why we can't continue to keep an eye on this. And that's why if you see things like yoga and Pilates, those are full movement languages that allow you to express these fascial positions, joint positions, breathing, rotation, right? That's not exercise. It's a movement practice. So if you wanted to do that, or, hey, let's start by sitting on the ground because I don't like yoga, and let's start by getting some input in.
Yeah, well, I guess that Kelly, you're reflecting a lot of my personal behaviors, which I didn't get it from your rule book. I'm glad to say that I'm kind of following it, but I love the idea of the eights. I have to say, I find that really fascinating. And
eights plus weights is really our game.
Yeah, and I just interacting with people like you just kind of is always a calibration for me and for our viewers and our readers and so on. How we kind of have to just remember to maintain, right? Because it's very easy to let it slip.
I think I want everyone to remember that this is a really long game and you don't win your health. I think we've been playing this like you've seen sort of infinite game, non-infinite game sort of ideology. We're playing this like a finite game, which means that like on Tuesday, I took my shirt off and I had abs and I won my health on Instagram. I looked super healthy and everyone high-fived me and gave me props. And then I just went back to eating, chips and donuts and ice cream and not moving, not sleeping. The key here is that it's hard for us to all imagine what 10 years of practice looks like. And really what we need is something called bone crushing consistency on the basics. And when you rinse, wash, repeat these things as a household, which is where it begins, not in the workplace, household, family, that's how we're going to fundamentally reform society and sort of begin to unburden these very complicated top-down approaches. It's really going to be really reform the industrial food system. It's a lot easier for me to say, well, hey kids, let's have some apples for dessert because we're behind on our grams.
Yeah. No, I love that. Okay, Kelly, let's jump into some quick fire questions. You down for that?
Let's go. These are my real calves.
All right,
I want everyone to know they're not calf implants.
Okay, so if you what's the one mobility exercise you think everybody should do first thing in the morning?
It's so good. First thing in the morning, I'd say get a hot shower and go for a walk. That'd be the first thing I do. Just move your body a little bit. What inherent in that question is really an interesting question is what's not important. You do not, So the thing that I am obsessed with is hip extension. And there's something called the couch stretch. And if you did the couch stretch every day, which is just getting your knee behind your butt into what looks like a lunge or a walking position, that will profoundly change your knees and back.
If someone has only 5 minutes for a mobility workout, what would you suggest that they focus on?
Some of all, you're a liar. You have longer than 5 minutes because you're going to be home and before you go to bed. So again, sit on the floor. Let's simplify it and let's get you some time in these end range positions. You could be spending time in the bottom position of a squat. You could be just sitting with your legs out in front of you. Let's instead of being very nuanced, let's go ahead and take a more of a global approach and say, hey, let's make sure that you're moving and at least exposing yourself to some of these key end range positions.
Okay, got it. So tell me, how does hydration impact on mobility and flexibility?
Oh, you should be totally hypohydrated all the time. Look, of course, you're a water being, but I think everyone's got the message that we should need to drink some water and probably put some salts back in our system. So if you're hypohydrated and you don't have those tissues, how are your layers of warm silk sliding over steel springs going to be? They're going to be kludgy. And so what we really want to make sure is that we are drinking an adequate water. But I'll remind you that you have this thing called thirst. And if you're thirsty, you should not drink coffee. You should be like, oh, let me drink some water. And that thirst is actually so highly attuned, but we've drowned it out. So if you're thirsty, you need to drink water, and you could really use that. And that ends up usually being a couple liters a day.
Got it. So what's the most common mobility myth that you see out there? What's worth debunking?
That it's all in your head. That, we're just making neurologic changes or perceiving, and that's not true at all. What we realize is that you're a system of systems, and certainly we are always integrating the nervous system in what we're doing. But if touch didn't work, think about all the massage therapists, chiros, osteo, physio people in the world. Why, if this is, bunk, how many physios on the premier team would go out of business mobilizing those hamstrings? And what we suddenly see is at low loads, low speeds, you can get away with a lot. At high loads, high speeds, you're probably going to need a little bit more input in your body. So just keep in mind that these small doses are critical and really an effective, democratized, safe way for you to begin a conversation with how your body moves and feels.
Got it. So is there a mobility movement or practice you think is underrated, but it's a really powerful one for everyday health?
I would say breathing. I don't think people have a breath practice, but if we look at the spine is sort of our organizing feature. And the first movement of the spine is breath. It's not flexion. It's not extension. So one of the things you could do easily is begin some breath practice. And I'm not saying for meditation. I'm saying it's almost a mechanical breathing practice. You can do that on the bike. Again, if you look on our site, or you just say breath spin up and Kelly Starrett, you'll see that there's a video there about some of the things that I like to do that really help us maintain range and keep the nervous system knowing it has access. We like to say if you can't breathe in a position, you don't own that position. So really working on breath, it turns out to be the through narrative for everything we do.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, I guess, Kelly, thank you so much for sharing your experience on mobility, resilience, longevity. Obviously, that very important self-care and fitness is kind of like completely part of everybody's existence. It should be.
I hope so.
Look, where do people find out more? I mean, I guess, do they look you up? Do they search the Ready State? What's the best way of getting in contact with you?
On the socials, we're at the Ready State. We have an entire sort of strength and conditioning program that's newish for us. That's, if you look at the Starrett system, that's all out there, but at the Ready State on all of the socials.
Brilliant. Great. Well, Kelly, thank you so much for joining us today. You've been
My
an
pleasure.
absolute star.